Welcome to Molywood-GUI tutorial number 5. This time we'll learn how to overlay dynamical data, by which I mean properties that evolve during an MD simulation, and also add some text labels. So let's start by exploring this dataset manager that we have here in newer versions of Molywood Movie Maker in the Prepare Dataset tab. What we can do here is we can create and visualize a dataset. And we have three ways of doing that. We can either import data from file, assuming that you have a frame-by-frame dataset that you calculated with your quantity of interest. You can use labels. So you can, for example, label distances of the hydrals in VMD, and you can load data from a label that you defined in VMD. Or you can measure one of the available quantities that are implemented here in VMD. We could do number of contacts, for example. If you go for a number of contacts and you do measure, as group 1, you can select, for example, look like, and as group 2, you can select res ID 34 as before, sorry, with a space, and I can calculate. I'm gonna get some numbers, right? If I just preview this naively, I'm gonna get this evolving plot, which is a dynamic growing plot. That's covering 1000 frames and going up because we have an interaction. If you remember, we have this trajectory that actually has more and more contacts over time until the final intercalation happens. All right, so this makes sense. We could also do something else. Instead of just showing the number of contacts, we could plot RMSD instead. So we can plot RMSD. This is RMSD without any extra alignment. So you have to do the alignment yourself. In this case, we can look at the RMSD of the ligand with respect to the final frame. So I can measure the RMSD for selection res ID 34 using frame ID reference from ID 1111 because we have 1112 frames. So this is going to be the last one counting from 0. And if I calculate this and I preview the plot, we're going to see a much more shaky plot because we're just jiggling around here, bouncing around the box until we kind of stick to the DNA in a stable way. To see this plot in a static way, I can choose this property to static. I'm gonna have the preview just like this, not moving, but plotted once and for all. And you can see, of course, we've got, we're going down to 0, but I can change the y-axis to something like -1 to 15. And if I preview this, I'm going to have a much better resolution of what's happening, right? I'm going to have like 3 stages of intercalation, and then we go down to 0 with the last frame. Okay, this is great. I'm going to adjust the x-axis label. For example, this can be time, capital time, in nanoseconds, and my y-axis label can be RMSD to bound in angstrom. I can preview this again to make sure that the labels are working well. They are. Looks perfect. This is a bit jumpy, so instead of having this very kind of wiggly plot, I can make this line a little bit thinner, and I can add a running average because we have 1000 frames. Let's go for a smoothing window of 10. And now I can make this line with a bit larger, like 2.5, and I can use orange, for example, to highlight this new line that will be put on top. I can switch this mode again to static, and I can preview to now see, we have the kind of outline of the plot below and the smooth line on top if I want that, right? That looks nice. What I can do is I can add another dynamic element. So I can click on this running average again and add a running average of 0, which is essentially copying the data set. And instead of line, I have several different plot types here. I have a line plot, I have a scatter plot, I have a bar plot that allows me to generate a histogram, and I have a contour, like a field contour that allows me to do a few different 2D plots, right? If I go to scatter, first of all, if I go to line, I have a few options that are dynamic plots. I can have a growing line. I can have a changing 1D plot. So this is a single line and it kind of changes over time. I can have 1D metadynamics that's created from a hills file in a Blumet format. You know, you have the description of the format always here. So use that if you need documentation. For scatter, I can use dynamic moving 1D, which creates a single moving dot. I can make this dot quite large, like size 200, and I can make it, what color can I make it? I don't know. Let's use crimson. And now I can preview. I'm gonna have the static plot here, and on top of it, I'm gonna have this dark red dot that's kind of showing where we are along the trajectory. So that's how I like it. In this case, you're free to experiment with different options. You can, preview immediately, so this takes no time to adjust some of the options. Another options you have here is to rescale the x-axis. Sorry, if your x-axis is in frames, but you want to convert it, for example, to time, you can rescale. You can just set the minimum and maximum, and it will be automatically rescaled. Or you can add a horizontal or vertical mark with a label, for example, to mark the average or mark some event as a vertical kind of threshold, right? For now, I'm happy with this visualization I have here. I can go to save and close. I can save it as dataset.dat. And I can start making my movie. Okay, so as always, I'm gonna go to do nothing for 1 second just to kind of ease in the transition. You can see that I made the left half of this space empty, so I can have the plot somewhere here. And indeed, I'm gonna add animate first to have the animation. That's gonna take 5 seconds in my case. And then what I can do is I can add an action called overlay plot. This will be overlaying the plot that we just created. And I want to put it somewhere here, right? So as origin, I can put 0, 0 again. This is just this bottom left corner. I can use 0, 0.1, so that it's not just at the very bottom, it's slightly above it. And I can set the relative size of 0.5, otherwise it will be as large as the whole video. As mode, I can switch from create and remove to create, so it will stay up after the animation is finished. And what else can I do? I can load dataset. I could create a dataset. It will go to this dataset manager. I can load a dataset because I already created this. And it saves all the additional labels and style details. Right? I don't need to set anything here because the time will be inherited from the animation. And now I can just select both of them and make them simultaneous. I can add this do nothing at the end. And that's perfect. Let's preview this. I can save the current state and use as a source always, and let's continue. In the preview, what I'm gonna have is this box that essentially shows where my plot will be. You can see it slightly overlaps with my molecules. I can try to move this molecule a little bit to the right to make more space, or I could make the plots slightly smaller. And the last thing I want to do here is to add a text box. So let's add another action, and that was going to be overlay text. And I can add an overlay saying intercalating into DNA, for example, right? It's a bit long, so if I just put it here, it's going to be maybe too big. I'm going to switch the text size to 0.8. And now origin, I can switch to the center mode. When I switch to center, is the center of the picture of the video that becomes the reference, right? So if I want my text centered around here, because also it's the center of the text that is being positioned now, not the left corner, I want to put it at minus 0.25 plus 0.25. So let's do it like this, minus 0.25, 0.25. As a mode, I can go back to create again. What else do I need to do? I can choose a text box. And for example, I can use a round text box with color being, for example, blue. And again, I don't need to set the text, I don't need to set the time. Add action. I can move this one up and merge with this one, make simultaneous. And let's try previewing this again. I can save the current state because I actually moved the representation a bit. And let's see. Now I'm going to have this kind of cross that shows the position of the text overlay. Right? If I'm happy with that, I can go to render and let's create the render with the default settings. Of course, it's going to be draft, so to say, but let's see how it works. Rendering the frames. Now it's going to take a bit to do both overlays, maybe a minute or so. And here we have it. This is our graph just as we previewed it with the text overlay and the animation in the background. Let's play this again. You can see that as the animation progresses, we get the first binding mode, the second binding mode, and the third binding mode at the end. And then at the very end, the labels don't disappear, so they stay on screen. This is exactly what we wanted. I hope you find this useful. I will show you more tricks for how to make cool molecular movies, and thanks for listening to this tutorial. I'll talk to you in another one.